Hey, what's going on, everybody? My name is Corey, better known as the Seaman, and I want to welcome you to another edition of the Seaman's Cinema Sit Down. And as I mentioned in my last video, oh, do I got all the Batman content coming for you guys? Yes, sir. Oh, I can't wait, man. We're just a mere week away from the Batman officially being in public screens all across America, and we're starting to see it pop up, in some other locations. And oh man, it's got me so excited. I'm less than 7 days now away as I go see it on Tuesday. I'm very, very excited, and I got plenty of Batman content, and we're going to stay where we were for that last video, which is where I talked about, kind of in full, the overall story and how this kind of sets up the Batman and the Riddler. And that is the companion movie novel called Before the Batman, an original movie novel. And we talked about that last video. If you haven't watched that, it is fully spoilers. I kind of go through the whole book in case you're not going to read it. You can check it out right up there, but I thought after editing that one and seeing kind of how all over the place I was as we talked about the book in general, I thought, why don't we hone it down to a simple amount of things that I kind of personally took away from the book. What am I talking about? Why don't you pull up a chair? Take a seat. We're getting ready to dive in. Spoiler filled. Yes, once again, there can't be a non-spoiler for a book like this. So we're diving in spoiler filled as I give you my 10 takeaways from Before the Batman, a movie novel for the Batman. Yeah, man, I really thought this was a cool read because it totally sets up Bruce as a character. It totally sets up Edward as a as a character, and seeing how it sets these things up really gives you an idea of who these characters are. The thing you can almost always guarantee with the Batman movies, you can pretty much jump in and start wherever you want because the fan base, for the most part, knows the origins and knows where these characters come from and who these characters are inherently. And that's why you can just jump right into a movie. You don't need a companion novel for the Batman. But if you have a companion novel, you really can establish the versions of these characters that we're going to get. And there are 10 major takeaways from this book, personally, for me. I'm going to kind of run through them chronologically. This is in no way an order of things that I think are most intriguing or most important, but if you just go through the book chronologically, these are kind of the 10 takeaways that I personally had in listening, not reading. I listened to the Audible, but if you're reading, either way, these are my 10 takeaways from Before the Batman, a movie novel. And the first and the big one, man, right out the gate, you find out that Wayne Manor is an orphanage. And Bruce and Alfred live at Wayne Tower, which also means that the Batcave is at Wayne Tower. We actually learn that it is underneath Wayne Tower. It was like a little subway, a personalized subway stop for the Waynes, where they could take a special, kind of train car right underneath Wayne Tower that could take them up to their apartments, or what they had to do, business-wise, or things that were going on in the tower. And that totally syncs up with what we've seen visually in the trailers. If you saw the Fandango half-hour interview with the whole cast, they're kind of on that piece of the set, or a display that looks very much like what we've seen with the kind of train staircases and where Bruce has his lab, and you get to find all that stuff out about the Batcave as you go through the book, and learn that that's where Bruce goes to get away. But much like anything going on in Wayne Manor, Alfred knows all things in Wayne Tower as well, and he's aware of the cave, and it's an interesting and cool thing to see that we're not gonna be at Wayne Manor necessarily this time around. Bruce lives at Wayne Tower, and the orphanage is a huge component in the book as it sets up where Edward Nashton is going to be raised and live his days. And one of the things that we'll get into, in the book is that you kind of can see where Ed gets his hatred for the elite in Gotham, and the biggest spokespeople or visual first thing that pops into your head would be the people that you saw in the portrait every day of your life in this orphanage of Martha and Thomas Wayne along with Bruce. And I loved, and the first big takeaway was that Wayne Manor is an orphanage and Wayne Tower is where Bruce and Alfred live, and that's where the Batcave is. All really, really cool things that I enjoyed finding out in the book. My second takeaway from the book is the idea of Bruce hating his own identity and having it start as early as 7 when we're at that orphanage prologue. He hates that the kids are looking at him, even though they're probably not really looking or staring at him that intensely. He sees it as like all these kids are like, oh man, here's the rich kid whose house we get to live in because he can go live in a different place. And just the idea of people knowing who he is and how that makes him uncomfortable is something that I took away, in the sense that, like, the version of Bruce that we've seen with Pattinson, a lot of people kind of had questions about, because he's not the billionaire playboy. He's kind of an introvert, and you kind of get that through the things and experiences that Bruce has, where he bumps up against his own personal identity, and having that in his DNA as early as 7 really builds to the idea of having a bat suit and becoming a masked vigilante. And I love that you get to see that at 7. We also get, obviously, way more examples at 17, which is where the first half of the book takes place, and as well at 27, which is where the second half of the book takes place. But like I said, man, I mean, when you go from the 7 to the 17, you go from kids gawking at you to getting pulled over for driving too fast by a bunch of police, and immediately it seems like you're going to get in trouble, and then they recognize who you are, and in the back of Bruce's head, it's like, well, what headlines will this lead to? How will Alfred catch me and I get in trouble? Because these guys know who I am, and then ends up turning into the fact that, like, because they know who he is, they let him off the hook, and that also is a moment where you start to see the beginning and the birth of why Bruce has issues with the Gotham PD and why he feels like he has to save this city. Because if these cops are spending their time, one, pulling over a 17-year-old who's driving too fast, and B, letting that kid go instead of making him an example or trying to teach him a lesson, like, you get in that DNA why he wants to do this on his own. And do this alone because you can't trust the police. And I love that that's what you get because he gets off. Not because he gets caught, but because he gets off. That's one of the reasons that he kind of dislikes the police. And it's like, if you're focusing on a 17-year-old driving a car through Gotham, why aren't you focused? Like, shouldn't you be focusing on way more important things than that? And that was one of the reasons Bruce felt like he kind of drive fast and get away with it, because why would the cops be hiding in alleys waiting to catch a kid driving a car when there's criminals, people that kill people in Gotham City? And then, of course, you get that last one at 27 where, Bruce is just in the street and he sees a mugger running away with an old lady's purse, so he just simply sticks out his foot, trips him. Purse pops up in the air, he catches it, gives it back to the lady, and then the minute the lady recognizes him, a swarm of people. And inside of that DNA is, what you've seen at 7 and at 17 for Bruce, where it's like, I can't do anything. I can't do anything without people knowing who I am, and people knowing who I am make it really difficult for me to do things, which just bakes in to that idea of, like, I have to be a mass vigilante if I'm going to take this city back and save this city and protect this city. And all of that stuff starts with the idea of Bruce hating his identity and seeing that throughout the course of this book, and that also kind of lines up with this more introverted version of Bruce that it seems like we're getting at the beginning. And I think one of the cool things for Robert Pattinson's arc as Batman that we might see is watching Bruce go from who he really is, who's this kind of quieter, introverted character, to getting the confidence of being Batman, to then taking that confidence and flipping it into the billionaire playboy act that we eventually, I'm sure, will see Bruce kind of take on as these movies go, hopefully. And all of that starts right here in the book with the DNA and the idea of Bruce just hating his identity in general. So that was another cool takeaway from me. My third major takeaway, which we kind of already hinted and talked about a little bit, is that Ed is an orphan at the orphanage. I think that's super important because it sets these two characters up to have this long-lived history indirectly with each other, right? And more from Edward Nashton's point of view than Bruce Wayne's point of view, because Nashton knows who Wayne is, and like we said, the idea of the elite in Gotham and that hatred that we see throughout the book kind of get broken into Ed's DNA. Having him be, at this orphanage, it just, it's an interesting way to connect the two characters to basically their whole lives together. There's just this cool thing where it's like Bruce has been a constant in Edward Nashton's life, and while Bruce sees Edward Nashton at a young age, doesn't know that he is connected to this person in this way, and kind of getting that and having it stem from the orphanage makes Bruce Wayne a central figure and somebody that, as the Riddler becomes the Riddler, is somebody he might want to go after, but it gives him the access. It gives him a point of entry into the Wayne story. And like I said, it uniquely puts him and Bruce at odds in the book before either of them are the Batman or the Riddler, and also allows us to kind of see that growth, and it all stems from that orphanage. My fourth major takeaway from the book is that Bruce gets his martial arts training from Alfred. And I love that it's Alfred that teaches Bruce the martial arts from his days, in the military. And all the different things that he learned along the way as he starts to teach this combination of martial arts to Bruce. He calls it Bruce Jitsu. I just love that stuff. And I love that that was our first into kind of the relationship that they have. Like, Bruce comes home at 17, and Alfred, wants to know what he was going to do for the summer, and then he's like, I'll be seeing you at the gym every morning. We're going to train, and puts Bruce on his ass, and Bruce comes in a little overconfident, where he's like, I'm 17, I'm young, I'm spry, I know what I'm doing, and Alfred is in his 40s and, on his ass. But I love that it starts with Alfred, and that is kind of the entry point for the relationship between the two of them. And you can just see in the way that he works with him in the gym how it translates over later on into the book when he finds out that Bruce has this car and that he's been street racing. But he kind of lets him off the hook because working that intimately and that closely, through martial arts and just helping raise the kid, basically, he knows that Bruce isn't a bad kid, and just the way that Alfred is able to handle him in those situations, really shows you how he is a father type figure, or a parental figure, but isn't the father or the mother. You know what I mean? Like, I love that you get to see that. And then again at 27, where he's like, yeah, I know you're up to something, Bruce. And Bruce, starts by letting him in by asking about, like, oh, who's a police officer that we can trust? I have some questions or whatever. And you can see how Alfred can kind of piece those things together. And the fact that Alfred knows everything. Like, he knows that the Batcave exists, or as he calls it to Bruce, like, you have your own little man cave here. Understands what's going on with the car, knows that he's building this suit, and is probably, like, you can see the way that Alfred's going to figure things out. And it all starts with Alfred teaching Bruce martial arts. And then we find out, stemming from that Bruce continues his knowledge and learns more things as he travels from college to college to college. Gets bored, changes colleges. Has a different idea for a major, changes to the college that has the best, teachers and schools for that major. And as he travels around, he learns more that way, traveling the whole world, which is kind of cool. And it's why he's so much older by the time he starts getting into the Batman stuff. But again, it all starts with Alfred teaching Bruce martial arts, and that's a really cool way to utilize the military version of the character, and kind of build what they'll build, I'm sure, for Andy Serkis in this movie. So excited for him and for this version. My fifth big takeaway from this movie is that Bruce builds the Batmobile at 17. That's huge, man. Like, the fact that the Batmobile is something that he builds and doesn't build to be a Batmobile, but builds it to be a street racer, and kind of getting this idea of living life on the edge and in the fast lane and doing something like illegal street races. It was just such a cool concept for Bruce, and was something that, again, could be a big point for Alfred to kind of really lay into him, but he opts not to. Gives him a pass because he knows that the racing is done. I thought it was a cool entryway into learning who Bruce is, how that plays into that introverted character that we kind of see, that this quieter version of Bruce, but how he has that outlet for his rage and his anger. And one of the things that I thought was really interesting is when Alfred is talking to him about the street racing and whatever, he's kind of saying, like, you realize, like, you have to make your parents' death more personal and come to terms with it and grapple with it in a different way, because this just looks like you're running from it. And the idea of running from something, maybe Bruce should take those feelings and turn it into running towards something, which becomes the antithesis of Bruce becoming Batman and why he becomes Batman. And the idea that he's never thought of, like, doing these things, and kind of being his way of being like combative or just finding his own lane, right? Like, outside of all these things and dealing with his own internal struggles through speed racing something that he just did and never thought of as those things. And again, how that concept of being a street racer eventually can fold into the same concepts and reasons why he would become the Batman. But the idea that he builds it at 17 is just so cool to me. And that the car was always something that was part of Bruce before the Batman. Like, that's a really cool thing. And then also just introducing us to the character of Dex. It's an in for Bruce to kind of understand how he can have the relationship he does with Catwoman. I'm not going to lie. When I was reading this character, Dex, at the beginning, before we find out who she actually is, it's Alexandra something or other, I thought that we were going to find out that her name was Selina Kyle, and we were going to get, we're going to get the Riddler, and we're going to get Selina. We even get a little bit of Cobblepot. But, like, we're going to get all these characters almost right out the gate. And instead, you end up with this original character that could maybe come into play down the road because of how she worked with criminals and her father's in jail, and they kind of don't tell you who her father is. And maybe is that a character that could come into play in other places? Maybe. But if nothing else, it at least gives you a really good idea of the relationship that Bruce has with her and the thrills and the things that come with that relationship and how he could be the way he is towards Selina. There just were a lot of similarities, and especially when you go from 17, where Bruce is doing the illegal thing as well, to 27, where he runs into her during his explosives investigation. Like, you can see why he lets her off the hook, because he understands her, and I think that's very similar to how he'll be with Selina, and all of that stems from him building the Batmobile at 17. So that was a really cool takeaway for me. Number 6, Ed Nashton is a delivery man. And remember, I was saying there was a way to connect Ed to the city even though he lived at Wayne Manor. And having to save his own money to go to college with no parents who work all the time, Ed becomes a delivery man. And he runs things all over town. And they don't mention this in the book, but you could totally see maybe Ed having a bit of a run-in with the criminal organizations if he's has this inner knowledge, right? Like, being a delivery man as a kid, he would know the city inside and out, and that being his connection and his, deep roots into Gotham, really can understand Gotham from a different perspective than Bruce, really sets, again, these two characters up for, whose Gotham is this? Is it Batman's and Bruce Wayne's, or is it the Riddler and Edward Nashton's city? Like, you kind of have these opposing forces, and you kind of get the tie-in to why he has the connection to the city because of him being a delivery man. Sets up the beginnings of the Riddler, because while he's on a delivery, he gets run off the road during a race that Bruce isn't participating in, but he was there for. And he just sees himself as he's invisible. These elite kids, he sees all these rich kids with their fast cars. I'm gonna get back at him, and his first crime is sticking the bomb in Dex's tailpipe. That leads to Bruce having his first person that he saves. Again, connecting these characters. And that starts with him being a delivery person, and then getting away with that explosive thing starts the building of him wanting to do it more. By the time he's 27 and he burns Wayne Manor down, really has this feeling of, like, I like doing things, knowing that I can do things, and getting away with things. And just seeing all of that stemming from Ed being a delivery person, again, just sets up a lot of the core DNA of what this version of the Riddler is going to look like and why he is the way that he is. You really can see this kind of terrorist vibe that we're getting from the Riddler coming through in the version of the character we see in the book. Which leads us to number 7 on our top 10 takeaways, or our total 10 takeaways. And that's the fact that the Batman's first case, when we jump to 27 after the street racing stuff, the first case he gets into intersects with Carmine Falcone via the Penguin through this character, Reed Piggy Porcello. What we end up finding out is this adhesive explosive gel that Batman runs into during a break-in is being delivered by Dex, and when he confronts Dex, Dex kind of says, it's this guy, Reed Piggy Porcello, but he gets all of his bad ideas from Oswald Cobblepot, the Penguin. And we do get one interaction where we see Porcello meeting with Falcone and the Penguin, and it allows us to kind of set up, a little bit of a baseline of why the Penguin could be the way the Penguin is. You see him very much as the number 2, bending the knee to Falcone. But you can also see if he's having these little side projects that aren't being run by Falcone, the ways in which he would want to start to climb and take over. You know, we see that Maroni gets put in prison, which opens up the door for Falcone to become the new, you know, main man in Gotham. And you can see, we barely any time with Penguin at all in this book, but just where he fits inside of where this case is that Bruce is working on, you can see the beginnings of why he's trying to break away, and what we could be getting in the Batman, which is supposed to set up the start of the rise of the Penguin, and then his show should really take us all the way through to him becoming, you know, a main man in Gotham. And I love the fact that it's, you know, something like experimental military grade explosive adhesives, right? And like that's something that the Penguin is running through a different channel and learning that. And having that be Bruce's first case is kind of cool because it kept it separate, it kept it, you know, generic, but tied in enough to the inner workings of Gotham where I was like, I like this. And again, gives us a taste of what might be coming for the Batman movie. Which leads us to number 8. And that's the fact that Batman's confidant at Gotham PD is not one James Gordon, but rather a Lieutenant Durr. And getting to meet Durr, you totally understand why this is someone that Alfred ultimately recommends. You know, he puts in some calls, he knows some people, and they're like, this Lieutenant Durr is pretty on the up, you know. And Batman, when he's working on trying to figure out where this gel is coming from or what it's made of, he runs into some blockers, and his way to get around them is to interact with the police. And Durr is the name that he's given. And it's one of those things where it's like, it very easily could have been Gordon, right? But having it be this Lieutenant Durr kind of sets up, again, this view of Batman, you know, working in tandem with a female perspective character, something that could very well go into his trust in working with Selina in the Batman. But I'll also be interested to see if this is actually a hint at a character that could be coming for Gotham PD, because Gotham PD is going to take place during year 1, and during year 1, this is the Batman's first case is in this book. So if that's his first run-in, the person who first throws on a bat signal, could this be the introduction to a character that we see maybe in the movie somewhere, but more likely in Gotham PD, the show? It was just something interesting that I was like, okay, Batman's going to have more than one person he can go to at the police department, and maybe how Durr maybe ties into Gordon is what we'll see in the Batman. Which takes us to number 9, and as Bruce is getting ready to become the Batman, he needs bulletproof material, and where's the best place to get that? Oh yeah, Wayne Industries. And this first case brings us to Bruce's first real interaction with Wayne Industries. He calls up like the technology science department and wants to learn about some of the things that they're making or whatever, and the guy that he calls is totally caught off guard. You know, another one of these things that we've seen in the comics and in the cartoons. You know, the idea of Bruce wanting to do something at Wayne Manor, and someone's like, yeah, okay, you're Bruce Wayne, whatever, and then Bruce has to go dig, like, here's my pass number, and they're like, oh shoot, it is Bruce Wayne. But it's one of those things where having him dive into that for the first time, you know, you kind of get this idea that he is not attached to Wayne Industries at all. We get that when he's 17, and Alfred, you know, is like, what are you going to do for the summer? I could set you up with an internship, and Bruce's like, I don't want to work for my father's company. Like, he doesn't seem to want to have anything to do with it, which also plays into this kind of introverted version of the character that we're seeing with Pattinson. And he understands also really quickly in doing this for the first time that he's got to be careful, you know, and just things that are inherent to the DNA of Bruce Wayne and Batman. Like, yeah, he uses Wayne Industries to get him his stuff, but he has to do it in ways so that he doesn't get caught. And in talking to this guy, realizes, shoot, I raised suspicions. I have to look into the whole company. I'm just interested. I'm trying to educate myself. But I thought it was cool to see that first interaction that he has pretty much at all with Wayne Industries is when he's trying to find flexible, bulletproof material for the suit that he's making. And when he's making the suit, one of the other things that I really loved too was that he doesn't have this negative interaction with a bat that, you know, creates the idea of him being Batman. All the things that turn him into Batman are laid out in this book. And this kind of brings me to number 10, and my overall biggest takeaway is that the book lays the DNA everywhere that you need for the Batman and the Riddler. And like I said, talking with the suit, like, you have this version of Batman, and you understand that, like, you know, the bat in a negative interaction, like, oh man, that wakes up this idea of the Batman, isn't what makes the Batman. And it makes a lot of sense, especially for this version of the character. Like, it was cool to see when he's coming up with a design that he's just in his Batcave, which isn't a Batcave yet, but underneath Wayne Tower, and he just sees a bat fly up and hang to the ceiling with a bunch of other bats. And that just gives him the idea to go, oh, you know what, let me tweak the design a little bit that I'm working on to make it, you know, maybe a little bit more intimidating. Uses the idea of the bat, like it just pops there. But all the DNA that goes into Batman being Batman, why he's a forensic detective, you know, the interest that he has, you know, through all of schooling as a kid, like this idea of science and understanding and how to solve puzzles, so to speak. And oppositely, seeing the Riddle want to create riddles for people to solve, like, you just see the DNA of these characters throughout, but the fact that, like, you know, the street racing and wanting to not be recognized because he hates that people know who he is, and all these things that lead into the secret identity of a Batman vigilante. Like, it's all these little pieces. It's not one moment that, oh man, all of a sudden Bruce wakes up and it's there. It's, you see these things inherently as character traits for Bruce, so that when he's confronted in a way where it's like, hey, why don't you run towards something? Yeah, maybe I can clean up this city, and I'll do it, you know, in a suit, and oh, a bat just happened to fly by. That gives me an idea. I just loved getting to see all that stuff throughout the course of the book, and from the Bruce side, like I said, it's the disguises. And in having that disguise at 17, understanding why he has these combat boots, which was a big talking point in that first trailer. One of the first things we see were those boots. You're like, yo, check out those boots. When he's disguised, he throws on an army jacket, just a pair of dark pants, and these combat boots, and ends up the first person he saves is Dex, who, ironically, has her car semi-blown up by the Riddler, but he does so by breaking the window with his boot and cleaning it out and having that be the first piece of protective wear because it was just part of a disguise. But seeing how disguises are part of the DNA, one of the things I didn't talk about in the last video, but they mentioned several times throughout the course of the book, is the use of black eye makeup. Like when he's first going out and doing things before he has the suit all set, they mentioned like how he uses eye black, and I love that that's part of the DNA of the character. You know, it's one of those things that we make fun of in the movies. He's got it on, he takes it off, he doesn't. This Bruce does. Oh, well, it's something that's been inherently baked into him. Like when he goes out and is trying to have people not recognize him, he wears this black cap and he puts this black makeup on. Like I love seeing that, the forensic stuff, like I said. So all the things that make Batman Batman, it's core to the DNA of who he is. And then on the flip side, the other character that this book is totally setting up is Ed Nashton. And like I said, hating Gotham's elite, you know, starting with that portrait of the Waynes in the orphanage, and being just not even seen as these rich kids race through the streets. Like, you get all of this from the time that Ed is 7 to the time that he's 17, you know, and people call him Ed Weird, and like, he's just the runt of the litter, so to speak. And you get that vibe throughout the whole book, and how that builds this terrorist version of the Riddler is really, really cool. You know, and the just the fact that like every time we see Nashton throughout the book, oh, he's writing down riddles in this journal, he's playing with words, he's solving, you know, word puzzles. All of that is just inherent to the character throughout. And then you get to the end where he burns, you know, Wayne Manor down, and he mentions like, you know, I have this collection of greeting cards that's referenced in the book. Maybe I should put a riddle and leave riddles at the scenes of my crimes, because he really digs doing illegal things and getting away with them. And it's one of those like, oh, okay, here's that piece. Now you add in this piece that was just inherent to who Ed Nashton was, and now all of a sudden you're starting to see the Riddler take shape. And that's the thing that's really cool with this book for me, and that's the thing that I loved reading it the most, is that you get the DNA of this version of Bruce and Ed Nashton, the Batman and the Riddler, and you have them opposite each other their whole lives, and without it always knowing it. Nashton obviously well more aware of Bruce Wayne than the other way around, but I just love seeing all that stuff baked right into the DNA of the characters that are on the page of the book, that will be on the page of the screenplay, or that are on the page of the screenplay that we will see on the big screen very soon. And that was the thing that was really cool for me. So there you go, man. Those are my 10 main takeaways from Before the Batman, a movie novel for the Batman. I really dug this book. It's an easy read, or even easier listen. It took a little over 2 hours. Highly recommend it. Those are the big takeaways for me. That's all I've got to say. I've exhausted all of the thoughts I had Before the Batman. Now I want to know what you're thinking, man. What were your takeaways from the book? What were the things that you dug? If me talking about the book is the first time you've had any experience with it, what things pop? What things are you now looking forward to in the movie? What do you have a better understanding of? And how important do you think something like this is to a movie like The Batman? You know, having a novel that can set things up, you know, before you actually get into the movie. You know, do you feel like maybe that could keep us from having that, like, we're going to have the first movie to just set everything up, and then our first real Batman movie will be the second one? Like, are we going to just dive into a really awesome Batman detective movie? Anything you're thinking about the movie, the book, my thoughts on those things, all of it, I want them down below in the comments section. Look forward to talking to you down there. As always, if you enjoyed this video, please give me a thumbs up. And if you're new, you want to come hang out with the C-Man anytime we're talking movies, TV, trailer, reactions, you want to be here as we approach the Batman and all of my coverage for that. You haven't, you want to be around the C-Man a little more, than hey, come join C-Maniac Nation, man. It's super easy. We have a good time over here talking about all the movies and the nerdy things. And you can join C-Maniac Nation by jumping over there, hitting that subscribe button, hit that little bell if you want those alerts. And until next time, for the C-Man's Cinema Sit Down, I've been the C-Man. I'm signing off. Peace. Oh, hey, what's going on? You must be sticking around because you're looking for more content featuring this guy. Well, guess what? You're in the right place. You can check out more videos right here and right here. And if you have and you want to come join that C-Maniac Nation, you can hit that subscribe right over there.